Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. Mark and I first met at his best friend's wedding when we were both 22 years old. For me, it was love at first sight. Mark, too, showed signs of interest towards me. The very next day after the wedding, we met again in the park where our first date took place. It was there, surrounded by the beauty of the park, that we began our romance. Our relationship was passionate and intense. Mark completely fulfilled me as a man, and even more, he became the prince I had been waiting for deep down in my soul. He was intelligent, kind, handsome, caring, strong, and fair. Mark always tried to cheer me up when I was feeling sad, encouraged me during difficult situations, and helped me tackle the problems in my life. He became my support, my ideal, and I loved him with all my heart. After a year of dating, we started living together. Another year later, we got married, and I thought that life couldn't get better. But then came the first major difficulties for our marriage. Mark was never lazy. He always tried to help me in everything. There were never situations where I worked around the house while he did nothing. He simply wasn't that kind of person. We cooked together, cleaned together, and did everything together. But despite all his efforts, problems still struck our family. The main problem was financial. As a young couple, we didn't earn as much money as we would have liked. This led to occasional conflicts, the kind of arguments that started small but escalated quickly. One such conflict turned into our first major quarrel. I left home for 2 weeks feeling hurt and upset. Despite Mark's non-confrontational nature, he showed no desire to reconcile. I was too proud to make the first move, and for the next 2 weeks I sat at home, waiting for him to take the first step. Then, one evening, Mark's best friend Donovan, whom I had met at the wedding, came to me. We had become friends over the years, and when he saw how upset I was, he came to support me. We talked about nothing in particular, just small talk to pass the time. It was casual, easy conversation, and I didn't even realize when it turned into something more. Before I knew it, Donovan and I were kissing passionately, caught up in the heat of the moment. We spent that night together, and I didn't regret it at the time. I saw it as a fair punishment for Mark's indifference. I thought it was justified. After all, Mark hadn't cared enough to make the first move to fix things. But 3 days later, Mark showed up with a bouquet of roses, looking genuinely remorseful. He apologized for his behavior, asking me to come back. When I saw my beloved Mark, I felt the veil lift from my eyes. I realized what I had done, but by then it was too late. I had crossed a line, and there was no taking it back. Still, I decided to move forward, to forget about what happened and find a way to make amends to my husband. We moved back in together, and Mark became much more attentive to me. He showered me with love, and for a time, everything seemed perfect. But then came the unexpected. I found out I was pregnant. Reading the dates on the pregnancy test with horror, I realized that the father of the child was not my husband, but Donovan. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I struggled with what to do for a long time, but I couldn't make a decision. I continued to do nothing until it was too late for an abortion. The question of whether to give birth or not arose, and after 6 months of inner turmoil, I gave birth to a son. The moment my son James was born, I felt a mixture of emotions: joy, guilt, and overwhelming sadness. Every night after leaving the maternity hospital, I would look at Mark and James and cry, realizing that because of my foolishness, I had betrayed my beloved husband. I knew I had to tell him the truth, but I couldn't bear to break his heart. Throughout my pregnancy, Mark was filled with happiness. He told everyone that his beloved wife would soon give him a son. I watched as he looked at our son in the maternity ward, unable to hold back his tears. "My little son," he whispered, "my joy, my pride." That's what Mark called James, our son. But how could I tell him that all of this was actually a lie? I decided that I would tell him the truth when James grew up a little. I would find the courage to confess my betrayal, but that moment never came. Instead, I kept lying. 14 years had passed, and everything in our family seemed wonderful. I had long forgotten about the deception that had once threatened to tear us apart. Over time, I came to realize that a father is not defined by the one who gives birth, but by the one who raises the child. Mark had done everything a father could do for James. He loved him, provided for him, and poured his heart into our family. He was and still is the man who raised James, and that is what mattered most. But as they say, all secrets eventually come to light, and mine was no exception. The truth was revealed entirely by accident. One day during a move, Mark found and read letters that I had written to his best friend Donovan, letters that I had never sent. I had written them out of frustration, out of guilt, and out of a deep sense of shame. But they were never meant to see the light of day. However, that day they did. When I came home that evening, I found Mark standing by the window in the dark, holding those letters in his hands. The sight of him, standing so still, so quiet, shattered everything inside me. I immediately knew. He knew. He had found out. Mark didn't say a word. He didn't even move. His eyes weren't angry. They were empty. It was as if he had shut off his emotions entirely. His gaze was cold and distant, like that of a man who had already given up. I couldn't hold back my tears. I begged for forgiveness, tried to explain myself, but Mark said nothing. He just stood there looking at me. As the silence grew unbearable, I understood what I had done. I was ready to accept any punishment, but Mark didn't react the way I expected. He simply stepped away from the window, walked over to the couch and sat down. He cried, quietly, as if he had no strength left to do anything else. Seeing him cry like that, so broken and defeated, broke me. I couldn't stop crying. I didn't know what to do or how to fix it. He continued to cry silently, staring into nothingness. Then after what felt like hours, he stood up. Without a word, he left the apartment. I was left there crying, realizing that I had shattered his entire life. Mark and I were both 38 years old. James was our only child. We had wanted more children, but due to my health problems, that hadn't worked out. For years, Mark had poured his life into caring for his best friend's child. James was the meaning of his life. He was his pride and joy. And now, Mark knew it was all a lie. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had done. I wanted to die, overwhelmed with guilt. But the thought of our son stopped me. The next morning, I couldn't bring myself to end it all. My son needed me, and that was the only thing that kept me going. The following morning, Mark came home. He said nothing to me. He packed his things, gathered everything he needed, and left. I tried to stop him, but he didn't look back. It's been 2 months since that day, and I still try to reach out to him. I beg him to forgive me, hoping that somehow there's still a chance for us. But Mark hasn't filed for divorce yet, and he continues to communicate with our son every day. There's still some connection between us, and that gives me hope. A year after James was born, Donovan found out the truth about his paternity. I never thought the news would affect him, but to my surprise, it awakened paternal feelings in him. He offered me a chance to leave my family and be with him, claiming that he and his wife didn't need children and that I had given him a child. Naturally, I refused. I had always loved Mark, and I felt nothing but friendly sympathy for Donovan. I didn't want to destroy his family, and I couldn't allow him to destroy mine. I wrote Donovan letters begging him not to interfere in our lives. I told him how much I loved my husband and my son, how I cherished our family, and I begged him to leave us alone. Donovan didn't listen right away, but after my constant request for him to stay out of our lives, he realized that a marriage based on impulse and without love wouldn't lead to anything good. He started sending me money as unofficial child support, but I refused that. Too, I couldn't accept money for something I had destroyed. Eventually, Donovan left my life, though he continued to be friends with Mark. For 14 years, we all carried on, until that night when the truth came out in those letters. I don't know why I kept those letters. Maybe it was my foolish sentimentality, but ultimately they cost me everything. Mark had always been a wonderful person, but after our first major argument, I acted out of spite and left home. It wasn't to go to Donovan, but to my brother's house, where I stayed for 2 weeks. During that time, I was with Donovan, and that was when things went too far. I acted on emotion and destroyed everything in the process. After the argument with Mark, we kept in touch, speaking often on the phone. He tried to reassure me, encouraging me to return home to my husband. But I was waiting for Mark himself to say it. After all, he was his friend, but he continued to remain silent. I couldn't make him do anything. He needed to come to that decision on his own, and it hurt more than I had expected. One evening, when my brother wasn't home, Donovan called and suggested coming over. He said that these things happen in many families at first, and I just needed to distract myself. I agreed. I had no idea what was going to unfold that evening. Donovan came over without hesitation. Well, you understand the rest. He was comforting, and I found myself in an intimate situation with him. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt as it happened, but at the time I tried to convince myself that it was just a way to cope. But deep down, I knew I was only running away from the truth. The next day, my son returned home after spending the weekend with his father. He told me over the phone that he had talked to Mark about the future of our family. I had been on edge all day, wondering what Mark had said to our son. He wouldn't lie to him, especially if he was willing to come back home under certain conditions. I had never cheated on my husband, except for that one mistake. It was the only mistake I had made in 16 years of marriage. My son doesn't know who his real father is, and I hope he never finds out. He loves Mark very much, trusts him, and is proud to have such a father. Their relationship is even better than the one I have with James. If he were to find out the truth now, it would break his heart. That thought terrified me more than anything else. A lot had changed over the past few weeks. Last weekend, my son talked to Mark, but Mark didn't say anything concrete about the future of our family. However, the possibility of reuniting with him wasn't denied, and that gave me some hope. On Tuesday, I decided to finally have a real conversation with my husband. I invited him to a restaurant for a date, just like in the old days. Surprisingly, Mark agreed almost immediately, which gave me the confidence that things could turn out well. We didn't stay long at the restaurant. Instead, we decided to take a walk in the park. The walk lasted for more than 4 hours. During that time, we reminisced about our past, how much we loved each other and how good we were together. We laughed, we cried, and we felt that bond that had once been so strong. Slowly, we transitioned to discussing our future. I asked my husband to come back to the family, but he didn't respond right away. It was clear that he was still processing everything. However, there was a quiet hope in his eyes that told me he might be willing to give us another chance. I knew he wasn't angry anymore, and that alone made me feel that there was still hope. That night, I intentionally sent our son to stay overnight at a friend's house, so the apartment would be empty. Mark knew about it. We spent that night together, just like we used to. It felt like the first time we had truly connected in a long time. The next morning, we didn't have much time to talk. Both of us had to hurry to work, but there was a peace between us that hadn't been there for months. Later that evening, when James and I were having dinner, Mark came home. He brought his things with him. I can't put into words how happy James and I were at that moment. Our son jumped into his father's arms with sheer joy. Could it be that Mark really forgave me? Most of all, I was afraid that after living with me for a while, Mark would realize that he didn't want this family anymore. But I love him so much. I know I betrayed him, and I'm ready to do anything to make up for my guilt. After his return, Mark didn't bring up the topic of fatherhood. And while he didn't pretend that nothing had happened, he didn't show any aggression or negativity toward me. Most importantly, his relationship with James hadn't changed. I had been so afraid that Mark might stop seeing James as his son, but that wasn't the case. Just yesterday evening, we talked about our son's future. We said that in 4 more years, James would be an adult and would probably leave home, proud and independent. Mark said he enjoyed being a father, but we also talked about having another child. I'm planning to make an appointment with the doctor soon, and I naturally told my husband about it. When he heard it, a happy smile appeared on his face. It was evident that he genuinely rejoiced at the idea. For the first time in so long, I could see a future with him, a future where we would raise another child together, heal from the past, and move forward. It felt like a new beginning. But in the back of my mind, I knew there was still so much more to work through. I had betrayed him, and no matter how much we healed, there would always be a scar. But I also knew that with time, we could rebuild. It wasn't going to be easy, but I had faith in our love. As the days passed, I found myself constantly on edge, questioning whether Mark had truly forgiven me or if he was just putting up with me for the sake of our son. Our family, once so full of warmth, had been torn apart by my mistake. But now with Mark home again, I couldn't help but feel a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could start over. Maybe we could rebuild what had been broken. Mark hadn't brought up the issue of fatherhood, and for that, I was grateful. It seemed that, while he had his own doubts and feelings, he was willing to let time heal the wounds. His relationship with James had remained unchanged, and I was grateful for that. It was the only thing that kept me going, the only thing that made me believe there was still hope for our family. That weekend, we spent more time together as a family. Mark and I took James to the park, where we watched him play soccer with some other kids. The day was filled with laughter and joy, and for a moment, I almost forgot about the past. It felt like we were a family again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark was still holding something back. He was distant in a way that I couldn't explain, and it worried me. Was he just being kind for the sake of our son, or was he still unsure of our future? I wanted to ask him, but I didn't want to push him too hard. I had already hurt him enough. The next few days passed in a blur. Mark went back to work, and I did my best to keep everything running smoothly at home. I tried to stay positive and focus on the small victories, like when Mark smiled at me or when James ran up to us with a drawing he had made at school. But the nagging feeling in the back of my mind wouldn't go away. What if Mark was only pretending for our son's sake? What if he had already made up his mind to leave? One evening after dinner, I decided to have a heart-to-heart with Mark. I knew it was time to ask him what was on my mind. We sat down on the couch, and I looked into his eyes, trying to gauge his feelings. "Mark," I began softly, "I need to know where we stand. I know things haven't been easy for us, but I love you and I want to make this work. Do you still want to be with me? Do you see a future for us?" Mark looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. My heart raced as I waited for him to respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I don't know, Rachel," he said quietly. "I'm not sure if I can ever fully forgive you for what happened, but I want to try. For you, for James, and for us. I want to see if we can rebuild what we had. I don't know if it's going to be easy, but I'm willing to try." His words were like a balm to my soul, and I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had been so afraid that he would say he didn't want to try anymore, that our family was beyond repair. But here he was, telling me that he was willing to work through the pain, to take the steps necessary to rebuild what we had lost. "I'll do whatever it takes, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "I know I hurt you and I can never take that back. But I'm here, and I want to make things right. I love you so much." Mark nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Rachel, and I want to try. But it's going to take time. We need to be patient with each other. I can't promise everything will be perfect, but I'm willing to give us a chance." We sat there in silence for a while, just holding each other, knowing that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but that we were willing to walk it together. It was a start, a small step, but a step forward nonetheless. As the weeks passed, Mark and I worked hard to rebuild our relationship. We spent more time together as a family, doing things that we hadn't done in years. We went on hikes, had dinner together, and made an effort to communicate more openly with each other. It wasn't always easy, and there were moments of doubt, but we kept pushing forward. One evening, Mark surprised me with a dinner date. He had made my favorite meal and set up the table with candles and flowers. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. I knew he was trying, and that was enough for me. "I've been thinking," Mark said as we ate, "about what you said about having another child. I'm not sure if we're ready for that yet, but I want you to know that I'm open to it. I want to build our future together, Rachel." Tears welled up in my eyes as I looked at him. This man, the one I had betrayed, was willing to try again. He was willing to let go of the past and build something new with me. It was more than I could have ever hoped for. "I don't know what to say," I whispered. "Thank you. Thank you for giving me another chance." Mark smiled softly, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We're in this together, Rachel, and that's what matters." His life, once full of hope and purpose, had crumbled before his eyes. Every part of him, every ounce of strength he had gathered over the years, seemed to vanish into thin air. A friend who had been by his side for over 15 years, someone he had laughed, cried, and shared countless memories with, was now a distant figure. The bond they had once shared was nothing but a fading memory, swallowed by the weight of betrayal and time. And then there was his wife, the woman he thought he would grow old with, now refusing to even look at him, let alone speak to him. She had become a stranger, a person whose love had turned into anger and resentment. But the real dagger came from his daughters, his precious little girls who now viewed him as a traitor. They were told stories, twisted versions of reality that painted him as the villain. And now, they wouldn't even allow him to talk to them. They were convinced that he had destroyed their family, that he was responsible for the pain that plagued their lives. And then there was the apartment, the home he had worked so tirelessly for, the place he had imagined raising his children, hosting family gatherings, and building memories. But now that dream was slipping through his fingers. His ex-wife, with all the legal tools at her disposal, would take it all away. All that hard work, all those sleepless nights, would mean nothing. It felt like his life was crumbling piece by piece, each fragment a reminder of everything he had lost. He couldn't even make sense of it. The pain was overwhelming, but he couldn't help but wonder, is this my fault? He didn't even know anymore. Did he deserve this? Did he deserve to have children who hated him? Did he deserve a wife who couldn't stand the sight of him? The guilt gnawed at him day and night, making it impossible to find peace. He thought about the day they had started the treatment. He thought about how much he had wanted a child, how much they both had wanted it. The dream of having a family, a perfect family, was something he had held on to for years. But the more they tried, the more it seemed like that dream was slipping farther and farther away. The treatments had been grueling, physically and emotionally draining. But he had done it, for her, for them, but in the end it hadn't worked. They had come to a painful realization: nothing would come of it. The doctors had said they had done everything they could, but there was nothing more to be done. The procedures were expensive, and it seemed like they were throwing their money into a bottomless pit. At first his husband had reacted calmly. At least that's how it had seemed. But now looking back, he realized just how much pain that news had caused him. His husband, the man he loved, the man who had supported him through everything, had quietly suffered. He had kept his pain hidden behind a mask of stoicism, and it had broken him in ways he hadn't understood at the time. But the worst was yet to come. The day came when their son James found out the truth. He had been told that his parents had been trying to have a child, but it hadn't worked. But what James didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was the depth of the lie. It wasn't just the failed treatments that had caused the distance between them. It was the secrets, the lies, the betrayals that had poisoned their family from the inside out. When James found out the truth, something inside him shattered. He wasn't the same boy anymore. The sweet, kind child they had raised had disappeared. In just a few days, he had turned into someone unrecognizable. The boy who had once been full of joy and innocence had become cold, ruthless, and distant. He no longer cared about family, about the people who had loved him. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and everything that had once mattered to him was suddenly meaningless. Their lives had become a nightmare. For the past 4 months, they had been living in a constant state of dread. Their son, their flesh and blood, had fallen into a dangerous spiral. He had started drinking alcohol, smoking weed, staying out all night, disappearing without a trace. They had no idea where he was, who he was with, or what he was doing. And the people he had started hanging around with, his new friends, were nothing short of terrifying. These were the kind of people who caused trouble wherever they went. Shady girls with a reputation that was known throughout the entire neighborhood. Their behavior was erratic, dangerous, and violent. They had become regulars at the police station, but the authorities did nothing. The police were helpless. They were told to deal with their domestic issues on their own. Nothing substantial can be done. We can't intervene unless a crime has been committed. Those words haunted him every day. They were left with nothing but to search for their runaway child, hoping, praying that he would return home safely. But the reality was that they had lost him. Their son, their pride and joy, had been swallowed by darkness, and they were powerless to bring him back. The pain of watching their son unravel was unbearable. He had been their hope, their future, and now it felt like everything they had worked for was slipping away piece by piece until there was nothing left but the ashes of a broken family. Our son, James, had become a stranger to us. Once he had clung to Mark like glue, a bond between them that felt unbreakable. They had shared countless moments together, and I had always believed that nothing could come between them. But now, it was as if Mark were a ghost in James's eyes. My heart broke each time I saw the anger and hate in James's expression, the words that spewed from his mouth, words that I knew came from a place of pain and betrayal. He was just a child, struggling with emotions that he didn't fully understand. suffering from the consequences of my actions. I knew this. I understood this. But it didn't make it any easier to watch. My husband didn't deserve this. Mark had been through so much already since the truth came out, and now the weight of everything was breaking him. Our decision not to have a child of our own, to try and heal the rift in our family, had seemed like the right thing to do. But all of that had been overshadowed by so much more. A month ago, Mark had been rushed to the hospital with a seizure. The doctors initially feared the worst, an impending heart attack. Thank God it wasn't. But still, the scare was real. Mark was diagnosed with health issues and placed on medication. The doctors even suggested that he might need surgery. They told him that stress could be the cause of much of his pain, that he needed to avoid stress in the future. But James, without knowing or caring, found every possible way to upset Mark. I tried with all my might to restrain him, to intervene when I could. But at times, it felt like I was fighting a losing battle. I could do so little, and in my husband's eyes I could see it. The pain, the resentment, the hopelessness. There were days when he just lay in bed, unresponsive, staring at the ceiling, consumed by his thoughts. He didn't speak to anyone. He barely moved. I had warned him that depression could make his condition worse, that it could harm his heart even more, but he didn't listen. Mark was only 39, but he looked like he had aged 50 years. His face was covered in deep wrinkles, dark bags under his eyes that made him look like a shadow of the man he once was. I cursed myself every day for my mistake, for my betrayal. I felt like I was living in a hell of my own making. The weight of my sins, my regrets, the lives I had destroyed, was more than I could bear. I prayed to God to bring peace to our family, to bring some sort of relief from the endless pain. But somewhere along the way, I had lost my faith. I didn't believe anymore. Not in God, not in happy endings. I had come to realize just how foolish it had been to hope that I could escape the consequences of what I had done. Just one betrayal, one mistake, and it had destroyed the lives of 6 people. 6 people who had once been whole, once been happy, and it was all on my conscience. But my situation wasn't the worst. Donovan, Mark's best friend, had it even worse. He had tried to find solace after his own heartbreak, but it hadn't worked. He and his wife Alice had gotten divorced. She took everything from him, leaving him on the streets. She had completely spiraled, going out to clubs, drinking, and switching lovers every week. She had never recovered from what happened, her husband's betrayal, and mine. I had tried to talk to her, tried to be there for her as her friend, as her sister, but every time I reached out, she exploded. She would fly into a hysterical rage, cursing, swearing, ready to fight. She was always morally weak, and I had shattered what little strength she had left. Her daughters now live with her in a 1-bedroom apartment, just so they wouldn't have to witness their mother's suitors coming and going. Donovan, on the other hand, I hadn't heard from in 6 months. After the divorce, he had disappeared. I had no idea where he was, or even if he was alive. And then there came December 31st, the last day of the year, the day that is supposed to be filled with joy, with celebration, with hope for the future. But not for me. Mark had gone to visit his parents in another city, where James was. I had no idea where he was. He wasn't answering his phone, and I didn't have any friends left. People had started to avoid us, to treat us like outcasts. It was as if we were lepers, a family so tainted by scandal and heartbreak that no one wanted to be around us. So there I was, sitting alone at the table, a bottle of wine by my side. I wasn't crying tears of joy. I wasn't celebrating the year that had passed. No, I was crying tears of loneliness, of emptiness, the kind of tears that come when you realize you've lost everything. I thought back to last year, to that New Year's Eve. That was real winter, the kind where everything feels alive, full of promise. We had celebrated then, together. How had it all gone so wrong? What's the point of living anymore? I wondered, will I find happiness in the new year? I didn't know. I wasn't sure of anything anymore. I'm sorry if I'm ruining your mood. I just needed to talk to someone, to cleanse my soul, to let it all out. Happy New Year to you, all the best to you. I can't wish for much anymore, but I hope you find what I've lost. If you find this story interesting and want to see more touching, tense, but meaningful situations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this story with your friends and remember to like the video so we can stay motivated to bring you more great and meaningful content. Thank you for watching and supporting us.